I glanced at my father's bank account and was stunned to see nearly $600 million sitting there. In that moment, a thought crossed my mind. This fortune is now mine. I don't need you anymore. After my gentle father-in-law passed away, I was still mourning when Jack, my husband, casually informed me that he wanted a divorce. It was then that I realized his true nature. The $600 million inheritance from his father had revealed him for what he really was. To Jack, I was nothing but a means to an end, a way to secure his lavish lifestyle once Dave was gone. Though I had witnessed hints of his character before, I never imagined he could be so heartless. Anger surged through me, and I found myself clenching my fists, ashamed of having fallen into this marriage. I could accept being deceived, but I couldn't bear his disrespect towards my kind father-in-law. "Fine," I said. "Give me the divorce papers." I grabbed the papers, signed them quickly, and tossed them back at him. "It's all yours now," I told him. "Yeah, leave it to me," he replied, his voice smug. He offered to send my belongings to me, but I walked past him, out of the living room, and left the house. I knew Jack would regret this decision, and sure enough, he called me later, panic-stricken when I told him that the $600 million was nothing more than a fantasy. I'm Sarah, 45 years old, working in sales. My husband Jack is also 45. He used to work in sales but is now a stay-at-home husband. The reason for this change involves my first husband, Tom, whose story I must share first. This is my second marriage. Tom, my first husband, tragically died in a work accident 5 years ago, leaving me a widow. Between life insurance and severance, I received around $600,000. Since I married Tom later in life, we never had children. I inherited the money along with my in-laws, but they insisted, "We're nearly 82 and don't have much time left, so we don't need it." I couldn't accept that, so I decided to give the money to my ex-brother-in-law, Mike, and his wife, Lisa, who were living with my in-laws. However, they too insisted, "We don't need much since it was your husband's money. You should use it." They only accepted a small portion. After paying a significant amount in inheritance taxes, most of the money ended up with me. Combined with my savings and steady income, I was relatively well off by the time I turned 41. Yet, despite all of this, I often felt a deep emptiness. Coming home from work to an empty house, the bed next to mine untouched, it felt like I was living in a void. The worst was when I accidentally made breakfast for two. As I took a bite of the second piece of toast, I realized, this is what it's like to have a hole in your heart. I wanted to take some time off, but the emptiness pushed me back to work. The sense of longing, of wanting anyone to listen to me, led me to Jack. And, unbeknownst to me, this would become a turning point in my life. When I told him about my husband passing away and how I had to take some time off because of it, he said, "I'm sorry for any inconvenience." I quickly replied, No, it was no inconvenience at all. Besides, your husband was a lucky man to have someone who cared for him so much. I'm sure he was very happy." He then shared a bit about himself, saying, "As for me, I'm terrible at relationships. Even when I do date someone, I get dumped quickly. I know it's because of my careless personality, but it seems hard to change who you are." My husband and I were business acquaintances before we got to know each other better. I knew he was a cheerful person, so when I visited his company, I ended up telling him everything. Normally, anyone would find such a dark and heavy story off-putting, but he listened quietly and then cheered me up with some light-hearted jokes. His words and smile seemed to fill a bit of the hole in my heart. He continued to listen to my stories, and we started meeting outside of work. One day, while we were talking, I accidentally dropped a receipt, and he jokingly said, "Wow, my wallet is twice as thick with coins. You dropped a receipt." And we both laughed. I need to organize it, but it's such a hassle. When he tried to pay at a store, receipts started falling out as he pulled out some cash. I picked up the receipts and handed them back to him, and he stuffed them back into his wallet, complaining about the coins. It seemed like the receipts were also making his wallet bulky. "You're like a kid, Jack," I teased. "What? I'm 45, you know," he replied. Just as he said, He was a bit careless, but watching him, I felt the hole in my heart slowly start to close. We kept meeting privately, and a year later, he told me he had feelings for me. It had only been a year since my previous husband passed away, so I was torn, but I felt like my late husband was telling me, "Don't stay stuck. Move forward." So I decided to start dating Jack. People around us had their opinions, but making that important decision helped me begin to heal. However, just a month later, Jack gave me an even bigger concern and asked me to make an incredibly important decision. Shouldn't we get married? Given our age, it's better to decide sooner rather than later. This time, I couldn't hear my late husband's voice guiding me. It felt like he was telling me to trust my own intuition and keep moving forward. So, I decided to marry Jack. "Okay, let's get married," I said, surprising even myself with how quickly I made that decision. It was likely Jack's personality rubbing off on me. I started to think that a bit of carelessness wasn't so bad if it made me more positive. At the same time, I learned from Jack that too much carelessness could be problematic. "Wait, live with your dad?" I asked. "Yeah, just recently he got sick and needs help with daily living. He kept working past 73, thinking he was still young, and now this happened." "What about your mom? Is she helping him?" "Huh? Didn't I mention it? My mom, Jane's, not around. My parents divorced when I was young, and I haven't seen her since." "This is the first I'm hearing of it. Sorry, don't be mad, but it's a heavy topic to bring up when we weren't sure about getting married yet, right? I figured I'd tell you later." "Even if you put off talking about living together, you could have told me about your parents. I would have known that living together might be an option." "Well, let's not get hung up on the details. Just meet my dad, Dave, and then decide if you're comfortable living with him. If it turns out that you can't live with him, we'll figure something out," Jack said with a grin. I couldn't mirror his smile. I wasn't about to turn down marriage simply because I didn't want to live together. I just wished he had been upfront with the important things earlier. I had always thought being careless wasn't such a big deal, but now I realized it wasn't the best approach after all. Eventually, I agreed to meet his father, as Jack had suggested. That's when I started to understand what he meant by small stuff. "Your house is pretty spacious," I commented, "just a little. It's only Dad and me, so there are a few extra rooms. If you move in, you can choose any of the spare rooms," Jack explained. I was about to meet his father for the first time, and naturally I felt a bit anxious. Ignoring my nerves, Jack opened the gate and headed toward the front door. The house was 3 stories tall, a bit larger than the nearby houses. It felt quite luxurious for just the two of them, but Jack seemed unsatisfied. "Dad's so cheap, he should have built a bigger house," he grumbled under his breath. I didn't comment, still too nervous about meeting his dad. "Dad, I brought her. This is Sarah," Jack announced as we entered. "Nice to meet you," I greeted. "Apologies for meeting you from my bed. I've been having trouble moving lately," Dave said. "Please, don't overexert yourself," I replied. Jack helped his father sit up. Dave wasn't completely bedridden. With some assistance, he was able to move around slowly. Despite his physical limitations, his mind seemed sharper than I had anticipated. "So, Sarah, you're in sales for office equipment. With the shift to paperless offices, I imagine selling hardware must be getting tougher," Dave inquired. "Yes, the sales of equipment have been declining across the industry for about 11 years, so everyone is focusing on offering new services or expanding into other business areas," I responded. "Given that the domestic market is nearly saturated, you'll have to look for countries with remaining demand for new services. Integration might be the way forward." "I believe there's something called MPS, right?" he said. I completely forgot I was speaking to my future father-in-law. The conversation had shifted so naturally to work that I had slipped into professional mode. He didn't press on the marriage topic either, probably being considerate of my feelings. After just a few minutes, I found myself developing a sense of respect for him. I began to understand why Jack had referred to living together as small stuff. Jack probably knew I wouldn't have any objections to living with his dad. About 30 minutes into our chat, Dave said, "My back is starting to ache. Sorry to cut this short, Sarah, but I need to rest now. Please take care of Jack. He's quite the talker."
"Sure, I will," I replied. Is sure the right response. His father seemed to cut the conversation short to avoid burdening me. I wanted to talk more, but I didn't want to tire him out. Feeling a bit disappointed, I left with Jack. On the way back, Jack told me more about his dad. "Dad's a serial entrepreneur," Jack said. "A serial what?" I asked. "A serial entrepreneur. He starts companies, grows them, then sells them. He's done it multiple times," Jack explained. "You can just buy and sell companies like that?" I was surprised. "Well, yeah. Selling one company involves millions of dollars. Starting and growing a company also needs a lot of money, so the sale isn't all profit. But still, Dad's pretty well off, he just doesn't like to spend. He could build a mansion that would make jaws drop, but he doesn't," Jack said. "Don't you know much about his work?" I asked. "He doesn't talk much about work or money. He never hired me for his companies or taught me how to make money. Living at home is the only way he spoils me. If he's got so much money, he could spoil me a little more, don't you think?" Jack replied. "Your dad probably has his reasons," I said. It seems his father was quite an impressive person. It made sense that Jack might feel overshadowed by him. Given how incredible his father is, Jack probably got compared to him a lot, so it's understandable that he'd have some complaints. "By the way, why did your mom, Jane, leave? Your dad seems so kind. It's hard to imagine their marriage not working out," I asked. "Mom spent a lot and wanted an easy life. After the divorce, people only came after Dad's money, so he decided never to marry again. He focused on work instead. With that much money, he could have spent a bit, don't you think?" Jack answered. "I don't believe in spending money just because you have it," I said. From what Jack told me, it seemed his mom relied on his father's money, so I couldn't agree with Jack on this point, but I think his words came from feeling inadequate compared to his father. Later, I talked with Jack about living with his father. His father currently relies on Jack for help and also gets assistance from a home helper when Jack is at work. I thought my husband and I would continue working while getting help from a home assistant to take care of my father-in-law. However, Jack surprised me with a different idea. "I want to quit my job and take care of Dad," Jack said. "What? Quit your job?" I was shocked. Dad's such an incredible person, right? I feel like I haven't done anything for him all this time, so from now on, I want to support him without relying on a caregiver. "I'll be like a homemaker," Jack explained. "I'll take care of the house too," Jack said. "Are you sure you won't regret quitting your job?" I asked. "I'd regret not doing anything for Dad more. I can go back to work after he's gone," he replied with a small smile. "That joke isn't funny," I said, feeling worried. I thought my husband might resent his father, but it turned out that wasn't the case. Despite everything, he really cared for his dad. "If you're going to be a homemaker, you better handle the housework properly," I warned. "Leave it to me," Jack said, puffing out his chest confidently. Since my father-in-law would cover his own expenses and my income would be enough for the two of us, I decided to leave the housework to my husband. When we got married and moved in together, everything seemed to go according to plan. I worked, while Jack took care of the household duties. He handled the chores, managed the finances, and supported his father. Whenever I tried to help, Jack would insist, "You're working hard, let me take care of the house stuff. You should rest." My father-in-law remained kind and shared many insightful stories with me. Our second marriage was off to a good start, but I did notice that sometimes when Jack was doing housework, my father-in-law would frown slightly. A month into our new life together, Jack began slacking off with the chores. "You're sleeping on the couch again? You've been there all day, haven't you?" I asked one afternoon. "No, I went to the fridge when I was thirsty and to the bathroom too." Jack tried to defend himself. "That's not what I mean. What about dinner? Did you go grocery shopping?" I asked. "Dinner's ready, don't worry," he replied nonchalantly. I glanced into the kitchen, but there was no sign of any food preparation. The only thing on the dining table was an empty container. It was clear he had been lazy all day. That's when I realized what he meant by "dinner's ready." At that moment, the intercom rang, and Jack grabbed his wallet, heading for the door. I was too stunned to speak. Jack had been diligent with the housework for only the first 3 weeks. After that, he gradually stopped contributing, and I was left to do all the cooking, cleaning, and laundry. It was typical of someone with a careless personality to start strong and then lose interest. Caught up in the excitement of marriage, I hadn't anticipated this shift. My father-in-law, however, must have seen it coming, which is why he frowned when Jack was handling chores. As Jack became more neglectful, my father-in-law began apologizing to me. "That boy is so careless, I'm really sorry, Sarah. I thought marriage would make him more responsible, but it seems like he's just causing you trouble. If he becomes a burden, feel free to kick him out." "I wouldn't do that. Really, it's okay," I reassured him. "I've tried to correct him, but, well, you know how he is." "It's all right, but he's still helping you a little, isn't he?" my father-in-law asked. "Yes, he does help, just not as much as he should," I replied, noticing the slight shift in my father-in-law's expression. He knew Jack wasn't entirely neglecting his father, but he also wasn't fully contributing either. It was clear he was trying to downplay the situation to avoid any conflict between us. "I'm sorry," I said, feeling a bit guilty. "No, Sarah, you don't need to apologize," my father-in-law responded kindly. With that simple word, "sorry," he seemed to understand the weight of the situation. We both exchanged apologies, and there was an awkward silence between us. To ease the tension, my father-in-law quickly changed the subject, his tone brighter. "Oh, I'm working on some end-of-life planning and could use your help. I'm not sure Jack can handle it." "End-of-life planning?" "It's not as negative as it sounds. I just want to avoid any trouble later." "Got it. If there's anything I can do, I'd be happy to help." Talking about Jack made us both cautious, so we ended up avoiding discussions about him and housework. It was an uncomfortable way of being considerate, but there were also thoughtful gestures that made me happy. "Is there anything inconvenient at home?" my father-in-law asked. "Not really, but the bathroom could use some fixing." "I had just wanted the water heater checked," I said, but my casual comment turned into something much bigger. "Wait, what's this?" I exclaimed when I saw the changes. My father-in-law had contacted a contractor he knew, and they completely renovated the bathroom. Not only were the tub and shower replaced, but the walls and floors were redone with special coatings to resist grime, and the drain was redesigned to make cleaning easier. They even installed a bath lift to help my father-in-law get in and out easily. "Now I can enjoy a nice clean bath, and it's easier for me to get in and out," he said. It was an extravagant use of money, and this happened a few times, where a small request turned into a huge upgrade. I learned not to ask my father-in-law for small favors lightly, yet my husband still called him stingy. I couldn't understand how Jack could see it that way, given how generously his father spent money. Out of curiosity, I asked my father-in-law about his most extravagant spending. "What's the most luxurious thing you've ever done?" I asked. "I started a seafood company in Germany, built the office and the factory from scratch. That cost a fortune." "A company in Germany? That's impressive. But it was work, right?" "Well, yes and no. I did it because I wanted to, so it was more like a hobby." "Why seafood in Germany? Was it because it was profitable?" "No, I had no knowledge or connections and didn't think about profits. Germany exports a lot of seafood and we import a lot of it. I love seafood, so I thought I could make money and eat all the food I wanted," he said, looking happier than I'd ever seen him. He must have really enjoyed that time. But if he just wanted seafood, he could have bought as much as he wanted. Starting a company overseas seemed extravagant. Do all successful people think this way? It's a world far beyond the understanding of an ordinary person like me. It made me realize that my father-in-law wasn't stingy. He was just careful about when and where to spend money. My husband just didn't understand that. One day, my husband, Jack, burst into Dave's room and vented his frustration at both of us. "You listen to Sarah's requests, but not mine. Are you talking about the bathroom? You use it too, right? And since cleaning is easier now, it's a big help to you as a homemaker, right? Sarah gets to enjoy a nice bathroom, and it's convenient for me too. No one loses here, Dave replied calmly. My husband clicked his tongue loudly and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I'm really sorry, I said. It's fine, but why don't you listen to your son's requests? I asked. He's just like his mother, Jane. When he has money, he spends it recklessly. Even with plenty of money, you need to understand its worth and how to use it responsibly. I've tried teaching him this many times, but he's still the same, Dave said, his face clouded with disappointment. Since that day, my husband became even more neglectful. Not only did he stop doing housework, but he also began causing unnecessary trouble. Whose motorcycle is that outside? Did you buy it? I demanded as soon as I walked in after work, but Jack didn't even look up from polishing a fancy-looking golf club in the living room. He had stopped contributing to the housework and was now spending money on whatever he wanted. I wouldn't have minded if he was using his own money, but he was dipping into my account without permission. You get everything you want from Dad? Let me enjoy a little luxury too, he said, trying to justify his actions. Jack had been a responsible homemaker at the beginning, and I hadn't seen this lazy side of him before we got married. It was as if he'd been hiding his true nature until after the wedding. I felt completely deceived. When we first got married, I had told him, if my salary isn't enough to cover our living expenses, feel free to use the money in my account. But after I took back my bank book to prevent him from accessing the money without my consent, I checked and discovered he had spent around $50,000 in just 3 weeks. It was a painful lesson that I couldn't trust him. I considered divorce, but I didn't want to leave my father-in-law in his care, so I pushed that thought aside. Jack seemed to sense that I wouldn't divorce him and became even more arrogant. Can't you come home earlier? I've been waiting for dinner all this time, he complained, lounging on the couch as if it were his personal nest, barely moving. Of course, he was doing no housework. What did it even mean to be a homemaker? I was starting to lose my understanding of it. He had claimed he didn't want to rely on a home assistant and wanted to be a good son, yet he had hired a caregiver once again. Honestly, this made me feel better, knowing that my father-in-law wasn't left solely in the care of my lazy husband. I decided to avoid him as much as possible, thinking, let sleeping dogs lie. With this mindset, the year passed by in a blur. Then, something major happened for both me and Jack. Thank you for everything. My father-in-law passed away just before his 81st birthday. The time I spent with him was brief but incredibly meaningful to me. It felt as if we had spent years together. Even after the funeral, I couldn't find the strength to pull myself together, and a deep emptiness settled in my heart. As I sat alone in the living room, overwhelmed by grief, Jack walked in wearing an unusually cheerful expression. Hey, let's get divorced, he said, as if discussing something trivial. His words snapped me out of my daze. He was holding the divorce papers, and it wasn't a misunderstanding or a joke. I found Dad's bank account. Guess how much is in it? Nearly $600 million. So this money is all mine, and you're no longer needed. You're just an ATM, he declared. When Dad collapsed a year ago, I didn't want to deal with taking care of him, so I looked for a wife. I thought you'd be an easy catch since you were grieving the loss of your first husband, Tom. I see, I said, finally understanding. So that's why you were in such a hurry to marry me? That's part of it, but then I changed my strategy. You inherited money from your late husband, right? You never talked about it, but I figured his retirement and insurance would be substantial. I took care of Dad while you acted as the ATM until he passed away. It was easier than working. Now that Dad's gone, I'm set for a lavish life with his inheritance. Do you think you can get away with this? I asked, feeling the anger rising. Of course, I'm his son, so it's only natural I inherit his wealth. He worked until he collapsed, and I thought he'd live until 87, but he died sooner than expected, so I'm lucky, he replied smugly. I realized I was clenching my fists. It was my fault for being tricked into marrying him, and I could accept that, but I couldn't forgive him for speaking so badly about my kind father-in-law. I was ready to punch him, not caring about the trouble it might cause later. But then I felt like I heard my father-in-law's voice saying, "Stay calm." There was no need to do anything rash. "Are you sure about this?" "All right, give me the divorce papers," I said. I snatched the papers from my husband, signed them on the spot, and handed them back. "Thanks for making this easy. I'll file these tomorrow. You can take all our savings. I've got $600 million, so take as much of that petty cash as you want," he said, clearly gloating. "Okay then. Yeah, leave it to me. I'll file the papers and send you your stuff if you want," I replied, walking past him and out of the house. As I left, my anger started to fade, and I felt a wave of laughter rising. My husband would soon regret divorcing me. That $600 million was just a pipe dream. A few days later, while staying at a hotel and looking for a new place to live, my ex-husband called. "Hey, what the hell did you do?" he yelled. I instinctively pulled the phone away from my ear as he started shouting. He seemed confused, so I needed to explain what was happening. "I can guess what happened, but why don't you tell me?" I asked calmly. "When I tried to withdraw money from Dad's account, they said this money can't be withdrawn. What's going on? There should be $600 million in there," he said, his voice full of frustration. "Looks like you didn't know. Since your dad didn't spoil you, you never took an interest in his affairs, right? And he never discussed his work with you," I explained. "Stop with the riddles. There's money, right?" he demanded. "Yes, there's $600 million, but it's collateral, so you can't touch it," I replied. "Collateral?" he asked, his voice shaking. "That's right. The money is in the account, but it's untouchable, like a pie in the sky. Also, that money is about to be used to pay off debts, so it'll be gone soon," I explained. "You're kidding? There's $600 million and I can't use any of it?" His voice grew quieter as he started to panic. I knew about the $600 million being collateral because I helped with my father-in-law's end-of-life planning. He had asked me to handle things if anything happened to him. Since he passed away, I was going to use the $600 million to settle his debts, but since my ex suddenly demanded a divorce, I left the paperwork to him, telling him to take care of the rest. "What did Dad do with the $600 million?" my ex asked. "He used it for something he loved," I replied. "What does that mean?" he asked, confused. At over 72, Dad, Dave, decided his next job would be his last, and used his savings for something he enjoyed. That seafood processing and distribution company in Germany he always talked about. He trusted the management to locals and planned to enjoy his retirement here. But it was a huge failure, and he lost almost everything. When he told me about it, he laughed, saying it was only natural since he did it without any real knowledge. He had no regrets about where he spent his money. To start that company, he borrowed $600 million using his savings as collateral, but it turned into debt, so he planned to repay it with another job. It seemed impossible, but he didn't think so. Even with the debt, he kept enough money for his retirement. In today's world where many struggle in retirement, it's impressive. However, while sorting out the Germany company, his health declined. When that happened, he renegotiated his repayment plan with the bank. Given his long history of high-value transactions, they trusted him. He told them, "If I can't work anymore, take the collateral." They agreed to a 2-year grace period, after which the debt would be paid off with the collateral if he couldn't work. That year is up and it's time to settle the debt, so this $600 million is debt repayment money and will soon be zero, my ex asked, his voice filled with shock. "Exactly. Didn't you find another bank account? There should be one for living expenses." "Yeah, I found one with $80,000 in it. That's money you can use freely. It's your inheritance." $600 million turned into $80,000. Why didn't he prepare more for his retirement? My ex wondered, clearly surprised. I was surprised by the $80,000 too, but knowing Jack, he likely planned to spend more if necessary. He seemed capable of anything. "And it looks like you haven't checked the will yet?" I asked. "Will?" "Dad told me he'd leave me about 20%, Jack replied, His voice strained. Well, we're getting divorced, so technically you could contest it as an infringement on your rightful inheritance, but I'd like to honor his wishes. I hope you'll agree to the 20%, I said, noticing the panic in his eyes. He had expected $600 million, but the reality was much smaller, and now he was visibly anxious. Why did he waste so much money? He could have bought anything with $600 million. Jack yelled in frustration. Yelling at me won't change anything. He was happiest when he talked about the things he spent his money on, and he had no regrets. It was his money, and he used it as he saw fit. He planned to repay his debt, so no one can complain. You're the one who jumped to conclusions and got ahead of yourself, I replied calmly. Why are you so panicked? The truth is, I thought I was getting $600 million, so I spent all my own money. Now my account is empty, he admitted, his voice trembling. What, seriously? I was shocked. My ex-husband had been spending money he didn't even have yet. Now that we were divorced, he couldn't rely on my savings anymore, and he was unemployed. I finally understood why he was so panicked. Still, you have a roof over your head and a house so you can rebuild your life, right? I suggested, trying to offer some perspective. I'm almost 54, unemployed, and have hardly any savings. What's going to happen to me? Please help me, he pleaded. Me? You have savings and a job, don't you? Why should I help an ex-husband? You're suffering the consequences of your own choices, I said firmly. Please, let's pretend the divorce never happened, he begged, but I ignored his pleas and hung up the phone. A careless personality is definitely not a good thing. With that thought in mind, I went back to browsing property listings. Surprisingly, Jack did follow through with the will and gave me $40,000 for my father-in-law's inheritance. It made up for the money he had taken from me. He probably thought it wasn't worth the trouble to argue over $40,000 after the mess with the $600 million. He also started working in sales again, but it seemed like he wasn't really committed. The shock of missing out on the $600 million had shaken his motivation, and he made frequent mistakes. After a month of being scolded by younger supervisors, he looked at his paycheck and lost all motivation. Comparing it to the $600 million he had expected, he quit after just a month and now works part-time, barely scraping by. As a result, his savings of $80,000 will likely dwindle. I wonder if he's thinking about his retirement. Well, whatever trouble he gets into now is not my concern. There's no ATM for him anymore, he'll have to work hard. I rented a small condo and started living on my own. I deposited the $40,000 from my father-in-law into my bank account. I consider it a kind of talisman, and I don't plan on spending it. Seeing it in my account feels like carrying a bit of my father-in-law's spirit with me, which motivates me. Today, I'll draw strength from his memory and do my best at work,